Rebecca had been working at Horizon Tech for 3 years now, and hardly anyone noticed her. She was the girl who answered phones, sorted mail, and made copies. The girl who took 2 buses every morning to get to work because she couldn't afford a car. The girl who lived in a tiny apartment where the heating barely worked in winter. But that was okay. She never expected anything more. Growing up the way she did, bouncing from one foster home to another, she learned early not to expect much from life. Having a steady job and a place to sleep at night was already more than she'd had for most of her childhood. On that particular Friday afternoon, Rebecca sat at her desk on the 3rd floor, staring at the resignation letter she'd just printed. Her hands shook a little as she held the paper. 3 years of her life, and it all came down to one simple page. She'd written it the night before, sitting on her worn-out couch with a cup of instant coffee going cold beside her. The reason for leaving? She'd kept it vague. Personal circumstances was all she wrote. How could she explain that her landlord had sold the building, and every apartment she could find in the city cost twice what she was making? How could she tell them that she'd taken a job in a small town called Riverside, 3 hours away, making even less money? But at least she could afford to eat and pay rent at the same time. She walked to the HR office, handed in the letter, and that was that. No big announcement. No farewell cake in the break room. Just a quiet exit, the same way she'd lived her whole life. Rebecca went back to her desk and started packing her few belongings. A coffee mug someone had given her last Christmas. A small plant that somehow survived despite her forgetting to water it half the time. A photo of her with the kids from the volunteer center where she used to help out on weekends, back when she had more time. As she packed, she thought about the real reason her heart was breaking. It wasn't the job she'd miss. It wasn't even the city with all its noise and expensive everything. It was the little girl on the ground floor. Lily. Sweet, curly-haired Lily, who was just 1.5 years old. The company had a daycare center on the ground floor, meant for employees' children. Rebecca had discovered it by accident about 1 year ago, when she'd gotten lost looking for the supply room. She'd heard crying and followed the sound, finding herself at the daycare entrance. Inside, she saw a tiny girl with tears streaming down her red, puffy face. The daycare workers were busy with other children, and this little one was sitting alone, clearly in distress. Rebecca couldn't help herself. She went in and knelt down beside the crying child. "Hey there, sweetheart," she'd said softly. "What's wrong?" The little girl had looked at her with those big, watery eyes and held up her bottle. Rebecca noticed something right away. The way the child's face was swollen. The rash on her cheeks. She'd seen this before, years ago, in one of the foster homes where she'd stayed. A little boy had the same reaction to milk. Rebecca had immediately alerted the daycare staff, who called the child's father. Turned out little Lily had a severe dairy allergy that no one knew about yet. Rebecca's quick observation that day might have saved the girl from a much worse reaction later on. After that, Rebecca started visiting the daycare during her lunch breaks. She'd tell herself she was just checking on Lily, making sure the staff was being careful about the allergy. But the truth was deeper than that. Every time Lily saw her and smiled, reaching out her little arms for a hug, Rebecca felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt needed. She felt like she mattered to someone. The daycare director, Mrs. Patterson, was a kind woman in her 50s who noticed Rebecca's dedication. They'd had coffee together one day, and Rebecca had opened up a little about her past. About growing up without a real family. About knowing what it felt like to be a kid who needed attention and didn't get enough of it. Lily's father, Mrs. Patterson had said carefully, "He's a good man, but he's drowning. His wife passed away 2 years ago, and he's trying to run this whole company while raising a baby. I don't think he realizes how little time he actually spends with her." Rebecca knew who Lily's father was, of course. Daniel Wright, the CEO. She'd seen him maybe 5 times in 3 years, always rushing through the lobby with his phone pressed to his ear, barely looking at anyone. He was the kind of man who lived in a different world than people like her. About 8 months ago, something happened that Rebecca still couldn't quite believe. Daniel's mother, who had been Lily's emergency contact, moved to another state for health reasons. Mrs. Patterson approached Rebecca one afternoon with an unusual request. "I know this is a lot to ask," the director had said, "but would you be willing to be listed as Lily's secondary emergency contact? You're here consistently, You know about her allergy, and honestly, you're the person Lily seems most comfortable with besides her father." Rebecca had agreed without hesitation, though it seemed crazy. She was nobody, just a low-level employee who made barely enough to survive. But if something happened to Lily and no one could reach Daniel, at least someone would be there who genuinely cared about the little girl. Mrs. Patterson had Daniel sign the authorization form during one of his rushed visits to the daycare. Rebecca watched from a distance as he scribbled his signature without even reading what he was signing. He probably had no idea he'd just made her, a person he'd never spoken to, responsible for his daughter's well-being in emergencies. That was 8 months ago. Since then, Rebecca had become a fixture in Lily's life. She'd arrive early to read to her before work. She'd spend her lunch break playing with blocks and singing silly songs. Some evenings, when Daniel was stuck in late meetings, Rebecca would stay past her shift just to keep Lily company until he arrived. No one paid her for those extra hours. She never asked for anything. She did it because when Lily hugged her and said Becca in that sweet baby voice, she felt like she had a purpose. For the first time in her life, someone was genuinely happy to see her every day. But now, packing up her desk on this quiet Friday afternoon, Rebecca knew she had to let go. She'd found herself getting too attached. She'd started thinking of Lily almost like her own daughter, and that was dangerous. Lily wasn't hers. Lily had a father, a real family, a future that didn't include a poor girl from nowhere who could barely take care of herself. The truth was, Rebecca's situation had become impossible. When her landlord told her about selling the building, she'd spent weeks searching for something affordable. Every apartment in the city was out of reach. She'd even looked into getting roommates, but that fell through too. The job offer from Riverside came at the perfect time, even though it meant leaving everything behind. She'd planned to tell Mrs. Patterson about updating Lily's emergency contact list. She really had. But something stopped her. Maybe it was selfish, but Rebecca thought, at least until they update the paperwork, someone who loves that little girl will be there if something goes wrong. By 5 o'clock, Rebecca's desk was empty. She took one last look around the office, then headed to the elevator. On the ground floor, she could hear children's voices from the daycare. She knew Lily was in there, probably playing with the toy kitchen she loved so much. Rebecca wanted to say goodbye, but she couldn't. If she saw Lily one more time, she might not be able to leave. So she walked past the daycare, pushed through the building's front doors, and stepped out into the cool evening air. She didn't look back. She couldn't. What Rebecca didn't know was that in just a few days everything would change. That Daniel Wright, the CEO who'd never noticed her existence, would finally learn her name. And it would happen in the worst possible way. Daniel Wright was in Chicago when his phone rang. It was Sunday afternoon, and he was supposed to be paying attention to the presentation his lead developer was giving about the new software launch. Instead, he was thinking about the 50 emails waiting in his inbox and the board meeting, scheduled for Tuesday morning. The call came from a number he didn't recognize. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. "Mr. Wright," a woman's voice, professional but urgent. "This is Linda Chen from Mercy General Hospital. We have your daughter here." Daniel's blood ran cold. Everything else in the room disappeared. What happened? "Is she okay?" She had an allergic reaction at daycare. "She's stable now, but we need you to get here as soon as possible." The next 3 hours were a blur. Daniel caught the first flight back, his hands gripping the armrest so tight his knuckles turned white. The woman on the phone had said Lily was stable, but what did that mean? Was she crying? Was she scared? Was she asking for him? He thought about all the times he'd stayed late at the office this week. About the business dinner he'd gone to Friday night instead of getting home in time to put Lily to bed. About how he'd barely seen her awake in the past month because he was always gone before she woke up and home, after she fell asleep. When he finally burst through the hospital doors, still wearing his conference badge and carrying his laptop bag, a nurse directed him to the pediatric ward. His heart was hammering so hard he thought it might break through his chest. He found Lily in a hospital bed that looked way too big for her tiny body. She was asleep, her curly hair spread across the pillow, an IV in her small hand. She looked so fragile, so vulnerable. Daniel sank into the chair beside her bed and just stared at his daughter, his eyes burning with tears he'd been holding back since that phone call. A doctor came in, a young woman with kind eyes and a clipboard. "Mr. Wright? I'm Dr. Patel. Lily's doing much better now. We gave her medication for the allergic reaction and she responded well. What happened? Daniel's voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. She was exposed to dairy at daycare. From what we understand, another child shared a yogurt snack with her. The reaction was quite severe, but fortunately we were contacted quickly and got her here in time. Daniel felt sick. He knew about Lily's allergy. They'd discovered it almost a year ago and had been so careful. How did this happen, and why hadn't anyone called him sooner? Mr. Right? The doctor continued, glancing at her notes. We tried to reach you multiple times, but your phone went straight to voicemail. We were able to contact the emergency contact listed on file, though. She gave us authorization to begin treatment while we kept trying to reach you. Daniel frowned. My mother? But she's in Florida. No, not your mother. A Rebecca Hayes. She arrived about 20 minutes before you did, actually. She's been with Lily this whole time until she fell asleep. She's in the waiting room now. Rebecca Hayes. Daniel searched his memory for the name and came up empty. I don't know anyone by that name. Dr. Patel looked surprised. Really? She seemed to know quite a bit about Lily. She told us about the dairy allergy and her other medical history. She was very concerned. After the doctor left, Daniel sat with Lily for a while, holding her small hand and watching her breathe. But his mind was racing. Who was Rebecca Hayes, and why was she listed as his daughter's emergency contact? He pulled out his phone and called Mrs. Patterson, the daycare director. She answered on the third ring, her voice filled with worry. Mr. Wright, thank goodness, I've been so worried. How's Lily? She's okay now. But Mrs. Patterson, can you explain something to me? Who is Rebecca Hayes? There was a pause on the other end. Rebecca. She's well, she was the young woman who spent time with Lily almost every day. From the main office upstairs. She worked in administration, I think. Was? Daniel caught the past tense. She resigned on Friday. Didn't give much notice. Just left. I was actually planning to call you about updating Lily's emergency contact information tomorrow. Daniel felt like he'd stepped into some alternate reality. Mrs. Patterson, how did this woman become Lily's emergency contact in the first place? You signed the authorization form yourself, Mr. Right? About 8 months ago when your mother moved to Florida. I suggested Rebecca because she was here so consistently and she knew about Lily's allergy. You signed it during one of your evening pickups. 8 months ago. Daniel vaguely remembered signing a bunch of papers one rushed evening, but he couldn't recall the details. He'd been overwhelmed with work, distracted, exhausted. Is she still here? This Rebecca? According to the nurse's station, she's in the waiting room. Daniel carefully extracted his hand from Lily's grip and walked out into the hallway. The waiting room wasn't hard to find, and neither was Rebecca. She was sitting in one of those uncomfortable plastic chairs, her head in her hands. She wore jeans and an old sweatshirt, and her long dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked young, maybe mid-20s, and completely exhausted. When she heard his footsteps, she looked up. Her eyes were red from crying. Are you Rebecca Hayes? Daniel asked. She stood up quickly, wiping at her eyes. Yes, you're Lily's father. Is she okay? The doctor said she was stable, but I've been so worried. She's fine, she's sleeping. Daniel studied this woman who was apparently so important in his daughter's life that she was listed as an emergency contact. I'm sorry, but I have to ask. How do you know my daughter? Rebecca looked down at her worn sneakers. I worked at your company, on the 3rd floor in administration. I used to visit Lily at the daycare during my lunch breaks. Used to. I resigned on Friday. I'm moving to Riverside for a new job. Daniel was putting pieces together, but they didn't make a complete picture yet. And you're listed as her emergency contact because I was there, Rebecca said simply. Your mother moved away, and Mrs. Patterson asked if I'd be willing to be listed as a backup. Someone who could make decisions if they couldn't reach you in an emergency. And today? How did you know to come here? You don't even work at the company anymore. Rebecca met his eyes then, and he saw something fierce in her expression. The daycare still had my number. They called me when they couldn't reach you, and I was in my car and heading back to the city within 5 minutes. I don't care if I don't work there anymore. Someone needed to be here for Lily. Daniel felt something twist in his chest. This stranger had dropped everything and driven 3 hours back to the city for his daughter, while he'd been sitting in a conference room in Chicago, unreachable. "I'm sorry," Rebecca added, her voice softer now. "I know this must be weird. I should have made sure they updated the contact list before I left. That's on me. How long were you here before I arrived?" "Maybe 20 minutes. The daycare called. Me about 4 hours ago, but I had to drive here from Riverside. I've been here since about 2:30. Daniel realized this woman had been sitting with his daughter, scared and worried for over an hour, a woman he'd never even met. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel said. "Why did you spend so much time with Lily? Mrs. Patterson said you were there almost every day." Rebecca's eyes welled up again and she quickly looked away. "I should go. Lily's fine, and you're here now. That's what matters." "Wait." Daniel reached out but didn't quite touch her arm. "Please, I need to understand this." Rebecca wrapped her arms around herself like she was trying to hold something in. "Your daughter is special. She's sweet and funny, and she deserves to have people in her life who show up for her. That's all. But why you? You didn't have to do any of this." "Maybe I didn't have to," Rebecca said, her voice breaking a little. "But I wanted to. Growing up, I spent a lot of time wishing someone would want to show up for me. I know what it feels like to be a kid who needs more attention than they're getting. And I saw that in Lily, and I couldn't walk past it." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. Was that what his daughter had become? A child who needed more attention than she was getting? "I work a lot," he heard himself say, defensive. "But I love my daughter." "I know you do," Rebecca said, and she sounded genuine. "I'm not judging you. I know you lost your wife and you're doing your best. I had some extra love to give and nowhere else to put it, so I gave it to Lily. That's all." Daniel didn't know what to say to that. This woman, this complete stranger, had seen something in his life that he'd been too blind to notice. She'd stepped in and filled a gap he didn't even know existed. "I'm sorry," Rebecca said again. "I really should go. I have to be back in Riverside tonight. My new job starts tomorrow morning." She started to walk away, but Daniel called after her. "Wait, I need your contact information, your current information." Rebecca turned back, looking confused. "Why?" "Because you're my daughter's emergency contact and I don't even have your phone number. What if something had happened and the daycare couldn't reach you either?" It was a weak excuse and they both knew it. But Rebecca pulled out her phone and they exchanged numbers, typing in the digits with that awkward dance people do when they're standing too far apart. "Thank you," Daniel said. "For today, for everything. I don't know how to properly thank you for what you did." "You don't need to thank me. Just be there for her, okay? That's all she needs." Then Rebecca Hayes walked away, her footsteps echoing down the hospital corridor. Daniel watched her go, this mysterious woman who'd been taking care of his daughter while he'd been too busy to notice. He went back to Lily's room and sat in that uncomfortable chair again, watching his daughter sleep. His mind was spinning with questions. What else had he missed? What else had he been too distracted to see? And why couldn't he stop thinking about the sadness in Rebecca's eyes when she'd talked about growing up, wishing someone would show up for her? That night, after Lily woke up, and he held her close. After the doctors said she could go home the next morning, Daniel made a decision. He was going to figure out who Rebecca Hayes was and why she'd cared so much about his daughter, because something told him this story was far from over. Daniel couldn't let it go. That should have been the end of it. Rebecca had helped in an emergency. He'd thanked her, and she'd gone back to her new life. But something about the whole situation kept nagging at him. On Monday morning, instead of diving into work like he usually did, Daniel found himself in the HR office. The woman behind the desk, Patricia, looked surprised to see the CEO standing there personally. "Mr. Wright, what can I do for you?" "I need to see the employee file for Rebecca Hayes. She worked in administration on the 3rd floor. Patricia typed on her computer, her eyebrows rising slightly. Rebecca Hayes resigned last Friday. Is there a problem? No problem. I just need to see her file. Patricia printed out what she had and handed it over. Daniel took it back to his office and spread the papers across his desk. The file was thin. Very thin. Rebecca had worked at Horizon Tech for 3 years, starting as a temporary worker and eventually being hired full-time. Her performance reviews were all positive. Nothing spectacular, but nothing concerning either. She was described as reliable, quiet, and always willing to help. Her salary made Daniel wince. She'd been making barely above minimum wage for 3 years. No wonder she couldn't afford to stay in the city. Her emergency contact section was what really got him. It was blank. No parents, no siblings, no friends. Just a note that said none available. Her exit interview form was almost empty too. Reason for leaving. Personal circumstances. Would she recommend the company to others? Yes. Any complaints or concerns? No. It was like reading about a ghost. Someone who'd passed through the company leaving barely a trace behind. Daniel pulled up the building's security footage next. He had access to everything as CEO, though he rarely used it. He started with the past week watching Rebecca's quiet exit on Friday afternoon. She'd packed a small box, walked to the elevator, and left. Nobody had said goodbye. Nobody had even looked up. Then he went back further. Weeks, months, and that's when he started to see it. Every morning at 7:15, Rebecca would arrive. But she wouldn't go straight to her desk on the 3rd floor. First, she'd go to the ground floor daycare. The cameras showed her slipping inside, staying for about 20 minutes, then heading upstairs to start her actual work. During lunch, she'd go back down. The footage showed her sitting on the floor with Lily, reading books, building with blocks, laughing at something the toddler did. Some evenings, when Daniel was stuck in late meetings, the cameras showed Rebecca staying past her shift, playing with Lily until Daniel finally arrived to pick her up. Sometimes that was 7 o'clock. Sometimes later, Daniel felt sick watching it. All those times he'd rushed into the daycare, stressed and distracted, grabbing Lily and hurrying home. Had he ever even noticed the young woman sitting on the floor with his daughter? Had he ever said hello? Thank you, anything? He searched his memory and came up empty. Rebecca had been invisible to him, just part of the background like the furniture or the walls. Daniel decided to dig deeper. He called an old friend who ran a private investigation firm. Michael, I need you to find out everything you can about someone. Rebecca Hayes, what kind of everything? Background. Where she grew up. Where she is now. Everything. Michael called back 2 days later. I've got what you asked for, but Danny, I have to ask. Why are you looking into this woman? This isn't like you. Just tell me what you found. Michael's report was thorough, and reading it made Daniel's chest hurt. Rebecca had grown up in the foster care system. Her mother had abandoned her at a fire station when she was 3 days old. She'd been placed with a foster family initially, but that didn't work out. Then another family, then another. By the time she turned 18, she'd lived in 14 different homes. She'd aged out of the system with nothing. No family, no money, no support. She'd worked 3 jobs while taking classes at community college, studying early childhood education. She'd never finished the degree because she couldn't afford to continue. For the past 3 years, she'd been living in a studio apartment in a rough part of town, working at Horizon Tech and volunteering at a children's center on weekends. The report included her current address in Riverside, a small town about 3 hours away. She was working at a diner, making less money than she had at Horizon Tech. But the cost of living was lower. Daniel sat in his office that evening, long after everyone else had gone home, reading through Rebecca's history. This woman had been dealt the worst possible hand in life. No family, no advantages, no safety net. And yet she'd still found it in herself to care for his daughter, expecting nothing in return. He thought about his own life. The private schools, the trust fund, the comfortable childhood with 2 loving parents. He'd never gone hungry. Never been alone. Never had to wonder if anyone cared whether he existed. And here was Rebecca, who'd had none of those things, showing his daughter the kind of pure, uncomplicated love that he'd been too busy to give. The next piece of the puzzle fell into place when Daniel finally sat down with Mrs. Patterson for a real conversation, not just a rushed exchange during pickup. Tell me about Rebecca and Lily, he said. Mrs. Patterson settled into her chair with a cup of tea. clearly grateful someone was finally asking. Where do I start? Rebecca first came to our attention about a year ago. She noticed Lily having a reaction to milk and alerted us immediately. Most people would have just walked by, but Rebecca stopped. She asked questions. She cared, and after that, she started visiting during her lunch breaks. At first I thought maybe she was just checking on Lily because of the allergy thing, but it became clear pretty quickly that it was more than that. She genuinely connected with your daughter. Mrs. Patterson paused, choosing her words carefully. Mr. Wright, I don't want to overstep. But Lily was struggling. She was quiet, withdrawn. The other children would play and laugh, but Lily often seemed sad. Rebecca noticed. She started spending more time with her, and slowly Lily started to come out of her shell. Daniel felt like he'd been punched. I didn't know she was struggling. I tried to bring it up a few times, but you were always in such a hurry. And Lily wasn't having any behavioral problems, so it wasn't urgent enough to force the conversation. What changed? With Rebecca? Mrs. Patterson smiled. Everything. Lily started smiling more, playing with the other kids. She'd run to the door in the morning looking for Rebecca. She started talking more. It was like watching a flower bloom. Daniel's throat felt tight. I didn't see any of that. You weren't here to see it. By the time you picked her up, Rebecca had usually already gone home. The early morning visits, the lunch breaks, the evening stays when you were running late. You two were like ships passing in the night. Why didn't Rebecca ever say anything to me? Why didn't she introduce herself? Mrs. Patterson looked at him with something like pity. Mr. Wright, I don't think Rebecca felt like she had the right to. She was just a low-level employee. You're the CEO. I think she felt like she was overstepping just by caring about Lily as much as she did. That's ridiculous, is it? This is a billion-dollar company. There's a pretty clear class divide here. Rebecca made barely enough to survive. She trailed off diplomatically. The point is, I think Rebecca felt like she was borrowing time with Lily. Time she didn't really deserve, but was grateful to have. Daniel went home that night and looked at his daughter differently. Really looked at her. Lily was playing with her toys, babbling to herself in that toddler way. She seemed happy enough. But was she? Or had he been too distracted to notice if she wasn't? Lily, he said, sitting down on the floor beside her. Do you remember Miss Rebecca? Lily's face lit up immediately. Becca read books. Yeah, she did. Do you miss her? Lily's expression fell. Becca gone? Daniel felt his heart crack. Yeah, baby. Becca had to go away for work. Becca come back. The hope in his daughter's voice killed him. I don't know, sweetie. Lily went back to her toys, but the light had gone out of her eyes. Daniel watched her and felt like the worst father in the world. That night, after Lily was asleep, Daniel pulled up Rebecca's phone number. He stared at it for a long time, his thumb hovering over the call button. What would he even say? Sorry I never noticed you taking care of my daughter for a year. Thanks for doing my job while I was too busy building a company. He put the phone down, then picked it up again, then put it down. Finally, he started typing a text message instead. Hi, Rebecca, this is Daniel Wright. I hope Riverside is treating you well. I wanted you to know that I've been learning a lot about everything you did for Lily this past year. I had no idea. I'm embarrassed that I didn't. I'm grateful beyond words. Lily misses you. She asks about you every day. He hit send before he could overthink it. 3 dots appeared almost immediately, showing Rebecca was typing. Then they disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, a message came through. I'm glad Lily is doing better. Please don't feel bad about anything. I was happy to spend time with her. I hope everything works out for you both. It was polite, distant. The kind of message you send to someone you barely know. Daniel read it 3 times, feeling frustrated. There was so much more he wanted to say, so many questions he wanted to ask, but he couldn't figure out how to ask them over text. So he made a decision that his assistant would have told him was crazy if he'd bothered to mention it to anyone. On Friday afternoon, Daniel left work early. He got in his car and started driving toward Riverside. He had no plan. No clear idea of what he was going to say. He just knew that this conversation needed to happen face to face. It took him 3 hours to get there, following the GPS through increasingly rural roads. Riverside was a small town, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. Daniel felt out of place in his expensive car and tailored suit. He found Rebecca's address easily. It was a small apartment complex, older but well-maintained. He sat in his car for 10 minutes trying to figure out what he was doing there. Finally, he got out and knocked on apartment 2B. Rebecca opened the door, and her jaw literally dropped. "Mr. Wright? What are you doing here?" "I needed to talk to you," Daniel said. "Can I come in?" Rebecca looked behind her at her tiny apartment, clearly embarrassed. But she stepped aside and let him in. The apartment was small but clean. Second-hand furniture but arranged nicely. Books on homemade shelves. Plants on the windowsill. It felt more like a home than his expensive house did. "I don't understand," Rebecca said, closing the door. "Why are you here?" Daniel turned to face her, and all the words he'd practiced on the drive evaporated. What came out instead was raw and honest. "Why didn't you tell me? About everything you did for Lily? Why didn't you ever say anything?" Rebecca stared at Daniel, her arms crossed defensively. She looked different here in her small apartment, wearing old jeans and a faded t-shirt. More real somehow, less invisible. "Why didn't I tell you?" she repeated, and he heard anger creeping into her voice. "You're seriously asking me that?" "Yes, I am." "Because you never saw me, Mr. Wright. In 3 years you never once looked at me." "Not really. I was just the girl who made copies and answered phones. I wasn't worth noticing." The words stung because they were true. Daniel opened his mouth to defend himself, but Rebecca wasn't done. And honestly, that was fine. I didn't need to be noticed. I wasn't doing it for recognition or thanks or whatever you think I wanted. I did it because your daughter needed someone, and I knew what that felt like. What felt like? Rebecca's eyes were shining now, angry tears threatening to spill over. Being a kid who needs more than they're getting. Being the child everyone's too busy for. I grew up in foster care, Mr. Wright. You know what that taught me? That kids know when nobody has time for them. They feel it in their bones. That's not fair, Daniel said, his own anger rising now. I love my daughter. I work hard to give her a good life. I know you love her. Rebecca's voice broke. That was never the question. But love isn't enough if you're never there to show it. Lily would light up when I walked in every morning. Do you know why? Because I was someone who was happy to see her. Someone who wasn't distracted or stressed or rushing off to the next meeting. I lost my wife, Daniel said, and he hated how defensive he sounded. I've been trying to keep everything together. The company, Lily, everything. I've been doing my best. And your best meant leaving your daughter with daycare workers and an emergency contact you didn't even know you'd authorized. Rebecca shook her head. I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm really not. But you asked me why I didn't tell you, and this is why. Because you were too busy to notice that a stranger was raising your daughter. So how would you have had time to hear about it? The silence that followed was heavy. Daniel sat down on her second-hand couch without being invited, suddenly exhausted. You're right, he said quietly. About all of it. Rebecca seemed surprised by that. The anger drained from her face, replaced by something sadder. I didn't come here to make you feel guilty, she said, sitting in the chair across from him. That's not why I did any of it. I saw a little girl who reminded me of myself, and I wanted to be for her what nobody was for me. That's all. Tell me, Daniel said, about growing up. Help me understand. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. Why do you want to know? Because you took care of my daughter for a year and I don't know anything about you. Because Lily asks about you every single day. Because I need to understand who you are. Rebecca sighed and pulled her knees up to her chest, making herself small in the chair. I was left at a fire station when I was 3 days old. The firefighters called the police and I went into the system. I got placed with families, but it never worked out. Sometimes it was their fault. Sometimes it was mine. By the time I was 18, I'd lived in 14 different homes. That's in your file, Daniel said. Rebecca's head snapped up. You looked at my file? I looked at everything. Security footage. Background check, everything I needed to understand. He expected her to be angry, but instead she just looked tired. Of course you did. CEOs have that kind of power, don't they? Rebecca, I'm not trying to invade your privacy. I'm trying to understand how someone who's been through what you've been through still has the capacity to care so much about someone else's child. Maybe that's exactly why, Rebecca said softly. When you grow up feeling invisible, you get really good at seeing other invisible people. And kids, they're invisible so often. Adults look right through them, thinking they're too young to understand or feel deeply. But they do. They feel everything. Is that how Lily felt? Invisible. Not invisible to the daycare workers. Mrs. Patterson and her staff are wonderful. But invisible to the person who mattered most? Yeah, I think so. Daniel felt like he couldn't breathe. I didn't know. How could I not know? Because you were drowning, Rebecca said, and her voice was gentler now. I'm not stupid, Mr. Wright. I know you lost your wife. I know you were trying to run a company and raise a baby alone. I know you were doing your best. But your best wasn't enough, and Lily was the one paying the price. And you just stepped in? Expected nothing? What was I supposed to expect? You want to know the truth? Spending time with Lily was the best part of my day. When I was with her, I wasn't the poor girl from foster care working a dead-end job. I was someone's favorite person. Do you know what that feels like when you've spent your whole life being nobody's favorite anything? Daniel saw tears running down Rebecca's cheeks now, and she angrily wiped them away. I'm not asking for your pity, she said. I've made peace with my life. I'm okay. But spending time with Lily filled something in me that's been empty for a long time, so I should be thanking you, not the other way around. Why did you leave? Daniel asked. Really? I told you. My landlord sold the building. I couldn't afford anything else in the city. You could have asked for a raise. Your salary was barely above minimum wage. Asked who? The HR department that probably didn't know I existed? You, the CEO who never looked at me once in 3 years? Rebecca shook her head. People like me don't ask for things like that. We're grateful to have jobs at all. That's not right. Maybe not. But it's reality. Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. There's another reason you left, isn't there? Rebecca looked away, and he knew he'd hit on something. I was getting too attached, she finally admitted. I was starting to think of Lily as mine, and that was dangerous. She's not my daughter. She never will be. I was the help, even if nobody was paying me to help. I needed to leave before I forgot that. What if you didn't have to be the help? The words came out before Daniel had fully thought them through. Rebecca frowned. What are you talking about? Daniel stood up and started pacing her small living room. I've been thinking about this all week. Lily needs you. That much is obvious. She asks about you constantly. She's been sad since you left, and I need help. Real help. From someone who actually cares about my daughter. You can hire a nanny. I'm sure you can afford the best. I don't want a nanny. I want someone Lily already loves. Someone who's already proven they'll put her first. Rebecca was shaking her head before he finished. No. No, Mr. Wright, you can't just swoop in and try to fix this with money. It's not about money. It's about what's best for Lily. What's best for Lily is having her father actually be present in her life, not hiring someone to fill the gap. You're right, Daniel said, and he meant it. And I'm going to do better. I've already started. I've hired someone to take over more of the day-to-day operations at the company. I'm cutting back my hours. I'm going to be the father Lily deserves. Then you don't need me, but Lily does. Come back. Not as an employee, not as the invisible girl nobody notices. Come back as Lily's caregiver. Live near us. Be part of her life properly. Let me pay you what you're actually worth. Rebecca stood up, anger flashing across her face again. You think you can just buy your way out of guilt? Throw money at the poor foster kid and feel better about yourself? That's not what I'm doing, isn't it? You feel bad that you didn't notice me. You feel guilty that I was helping raise your daughter while you were busy. So now you want to make it all neat and tidy by giving me a job. But we're from different worlds, Mr. Wright. You're a billionaire CEO, I'm nobody. This doesn't work. Stop saying you're nobody, Daniel said, his voice rising. You're the person my daughter loves. You're the person who saved her life by noticing her allergy. You're the person who showed up at the hospital when I couldn't be reached. How is that nobody? Because in a month or 6 months or a year, you'll remember that I'm just the poor girl who you hired out of guilt, and you'll want me gone. And I'll have let myself care about Lily even more than I already do. And leaving will destroy me. I can't do that. I can't set myself up for that kind of hurt. Daniel stopped pacing and looked at her. Really looked at her. This young woman who'd been through so much and still had the courage to love his daughter. This woman who saw herself as nobody when she was in fact extraordinary. I'm not going to want you gone, he said quietly. You don't know that. You're right. I don't, but I know that Lily needs you. And I know that I need someone in my life who's brave enough to tell me when I'm screwing up as a father. Someone who actually sees my daughter, really sees her the way you do. Rebecca wrapped her arms around herself again. I can't go back to being invisible. If I come back, I can't be the person nobody notices. I can't do that again. You won't be. I see you now, Rebecca. Finally, and I'm sorry it took so long. They stood there in her tiny living room, the evening light fading outside. Rebecca looked torn, caught between hope and fear. What are you actually offering? She finally asked. Come back to the city. Be Lily's full-time caregiver. I'll pay you 3 times what you were making before, plus health insurance and housing assistance so you can afford a decent place near us. You'll have set hours, real days off. And most importantly, you won't be invisible. You'll be part of Lily's life officially with the recognition you deserve. Why would you do this? Because it's the right thing to do. Because Lily loves you. Because I've spent the last week learning about everything you did. And I realized you're exactly the kind of person I want in my daughter's life. Rebecca was quiet for so long that Daniel thought she'd say no. Then finally she spoke. I need to think about it. Of course, take all the time you need. I mean, really think about it. This isn't just a job offer. This is my whole life changing. Again, I need to be sure. Daniel nodded and pulled out his phone. This is my personal number. Call me when you decide. Whatever you choose, I respect it. He started toward the door, then turned back. Rebecca? Thank you. For everything you did for Lily. Whether you come back or not, you changed her life. You changed both our lives, and I'll never forget that. Rebecca didn't say anything, but he saw fresh tears in her eyes as he left. Rebecca didn't call for 3 days. 3 long days during which Daniel checked his phone constantly, jumping every time it buzzed with a notification. He spent those days being the father he should have been all along. He took Lily to the park even though he had emails piling up. He read her bedtime stories, doing silly voices that made her giggle. He sat on the floor and built block towers with her, letting her knock them down over and over, and every day Lily asked about Becca. When Becca come back? She'd say, her little face hopeful. I don't know, baby. Daniel would answer honestly. Maybe soon. Maybe not. On the 3rd night, his phone rang at 8:30. He'd just put Lily to bed and was sitting in his living room staring at nothing. Hello? Mr. Wright? It's Rebecca. Her voice was nervous. Daniel sat up straighter. Rebecca, hi. I've been thinking about your offer, and? There was a long pause. Before I answer, I need to know something. Why does this matter so much to you? Is it really about Lily, or is it about easing your guilt? It was a fair question. Daniel had been asking himself the same thing for 3 days. It started as guilt, he admitted. I won't lie about that. Finding out that you'd been caring for my daughter while I was too blind to notice, that hurt. It made me face some ugly truths about the kind of father I'd become. But, Rebecca prompted, but then I started learning about you, about everything you've overcome, everything you've survived, and I realized this isn't just about making myself feel better. It's about doing what's right for Lily. She needs someone like you in her life, someone who knows what it feels like to be overlooked and makes sure she never feels that way. I'm scared, Rebecca said quietly. Of what? Of caring too much. Of letting myself love her like she's mine and then losing her anyway. Of being in your world and never quite fitting. Of 1,000 things. Daniel understood that fear. I can't promise it'll be easy, but I can promise that if you come back, you won't be invisible. You'll matter to Lily and you'll matter to me. To you, you're teaching me how to be a better father. Whether you mean to or not, you're showing me what it means to actually see my daughter. I need that. Rebecca was quiet again. Daniel waited, his heart pounding. Okay, she finally said. I'll come back. Daniel felt relief wash over him. Really? But I have conditions. Name them. First, I'm not just an employee. If I'm going to be part of Lily's life, I need to have a real voice in decisions about her care. Not just someone you can override whenever you want. Agreed. Second, I need my own space, not some apartment you control. I'll accept help with rent, but I need independence. A place that's mine. Done. And third, Rebecca paused. You have to promise me that you'll keep working on being present for Lily. I'm not coming back to be a replacement parent. I'm coming back to be support. She needs her father. I promise, Daniel said, and he meant it with everything in him. When can you start? I need to give my job here 2 weeks' notice, and I'll need time to find an apartment and move. Maybe a month? A month. Okay. It felt like forever, but Daniel knew she was right to do this properly. Rebecca? Yeah? Thank you for giving us this chance. I'm doing it for Lily, Rebecca said, but her voice was softer than before. I'll call you when I have a moving date. The next month was the longest of Daniel's life. He threw himself into being a present father while counting down the days until Rebecca would return. He took Lily to story time at the library. They had picnics in the park. He learned that she loved strawberries but hated bananas, that she was scared of the vacuum cleaner, that she laughed when he sang off-key. He also made changes at work. He promoted someone to chief operating officer and delegated most of the day-to-day decisions. He set strict boundaries around his work hours. No more late-night emails, no more weekend conference calls. His time with Lily became sacred. His board of directors thought he'd lost his mind, but Daniel didn't care. He'd almost lost something far more important than any business deal. He also helped Rebecca find an apartment. Not too close because she'd asked for independence, but near enough that she could easily get to his house. It was in a nice neighborhood, safe and clean, with a little balcony where she could put plants. When moving day came, Daniel showed up with a truck he'd rented and 2 guys from the office who'd volunteered to help. Rebecca looked shocked when she opened the door of her Riverside apartment and saw them. "You didn't have to do this." "I know," Daniel said. "But we wanted to." The move went quickly. Rebecca didn't have much, a fact that made Daniel's chest hurt. They loaded everything into the truck, and he drove behind her as she followed in her old car to the city. When they got to her new apartment, Rebecca stood in the empty space and just stared. It was small but bright, with new paint and updated appliances. "This is too much," she said. "It's what you deserve," Daniel replied. They spent the afternoon unloading boxes and setting up furniture. Daniel found himself laughing at Rebecca's stubborn insistence that she didn't need help arranging things, even as she clearly struggled with the heavier pieces. "You know, you're allowed to accept help," he told her. "I'm not used to it," she admitted. "Get used to it. You're not alone anymore." Something shifted in Rebecca's expression. She looked at him like she was seeing him for the first time. "You're different than I thought you'd be." "Different how?" "More human. Less CEO. When I worked at your company, you seemed so untouchable, like you existed on a different plane than the rest of us. But you're just a guy trying to figure things out, aren't you?" "Pretty much," Daniel said with a small smile. "A guy who's been screwing up a lot and trying to do better." That evening, after everything was unpacked and the helpers had gone home, Daniel made one more trip to Rebecca's apartment with Lily. When Rebecca opened the door, Lily's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Becca!" she squealed, reaching out her little arms. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears as she took Lily into her arms. The toddler wrapped herself around Rebecca like she never wanted to let go. "I missed you so much," Rebecca whispered into Lily's curly hair. "Missed Becca," Lily agreed, patting Rebecca's cheek. Daniel watched them and felt something warm in his chest. This was right. This was what Lily needed. Over the next few months, they found their rhythm. Rebecca would arrive each morning at 7:30. She'd make breakfast with Lily while Daniel got ready for work. They'd play, read stories, go to the park. Sometimes Daniel would come home for lunch and find them making a blanket fort or having a tea party with stuffed animals. Rebecca insisted that Daniel do bedtime routine every night. "That's your time with her," she'd say, even when he was exhausted from work. Slowly, Lily began to blossom even more. She was more confident, more talkative, happier. And Daniel was amazed to realize he was happier too. He found himself looking forward to coming home knowing Rebecca and Lily would be there. He started noticing little things, like how Rebecca always hummed when she was cooking, or how she'd scrunch her nose when she was thinking hard about something. One evening, about 6 months after Rebecca had returned, Daniel came home to find her and Lily baking cookies. The kitchen was a disaster, flour everywhere, but they were laughing. "Daddy, look, we made cookies." Lily held up a misshapen blob proudly. "That's the best cookie I've ever seen," Daniel said honestly. After Lily was in bed, Daniel found Rebecca cleaning up the kitchen. He grabbed a dish towel and started helping. "You don't have to do that," Rebecca said. "I know. I want to." They worked in comfortable silence for a while. Then Daniel spoke. "Rebecca, can I ask you something?" "Sure. Are you happy? Being back here, being part of our lives?" Rebecca paused, her hands in the soapy water. "Yeah," she said softly, "I am. For the first time in my life, I feel like I belong somewhere, like I'm part of something real." "Good," Daniel said, "because I can't imagine our lives without you anymore." Rebecca looked at him, really looked at him, and Daniel saw something in her eyes he hadn't noticed before.